Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and we are fully loaded and ready for a great show. Georgia disappointing last night in the SEC tournament. We'll talk about what's next for them. Terrence Edwards stops by. We didn't get a chance to speak to Terrence last week. He here today. There are a couple of receivers in particular that we do need to ask Terrence about, and we'll also kind of look at some of the stuff we saw from Gunnar Stockton yesterday, too. We'll kind of get into all of that with Terrence. Very, very fiery challenge from Kirby Smart to his UGA players. I liked this. I believe you will, too. But off the top of the program, speaking of things you'll like, one of the newcomers to Georgia generating the most buzz, and another former Dawg has kind of re-upped something that he said about him recently. This gives you a lot of, I think, sort of fun thoughts about kind of how this may all play out for Georgia this season, just for fun. We'll start with that here coming up in just a moment. We are glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I begin with my solemn vow that I can promise you under no uncertain terms on today's show will we discuss anything that has to do with something that you may have seen on Snapchat or about Snapchat. And this is one of those things where if you know, you know, and if you don't, consider yourself lucky. There will be no Snapchat discussions on our program today, and hopefully never. That's just sort of the way we like it on that. We instead will do this. Yesterday we got into a lot of stuff about kind of the state of the Georgia offense, what fans are saying about that, what Kirby Smart has said about that. And, obviously that's kind of been an ongoing discussion. We've tried to be as fair as we can about acknowledging what some fans have noticed related to some shortcomings there, statistically speaking, certainly from the previous year, while also acknowledging, hey, Georgia still had a successful season, the sort of season that many programs would be envious of, and the building blocks for even greater success in 2025, we certainly see the potential for that. We tried to, give platform for those who want, to acknowledge, what needs to improve, while also giving platform to the obvious success that Georgia is still enjoying and the track record for success that's been sort of established over the course of the last few years. We sort of tried to do that as well as we possibly could. I want to begin by reading something from a listener that I got. I think this is really interesting. General Buster Grant's his name. He writes in to say, on the topic of the Bobo Serrals in the offense, he says, I think you had a very balanced conversation about the offensive issues. I always enjoy hearing that. We strive for that kind of thing, not to be too bombastic. We don't want to make fools of ourselves or anything like that. So I'm always happy to hear that. However, what I really want to read from Buster here goes into the next part of this. He says, okay, so with all the talk about the offense and kind of what should be considered on both sides of that coin, he says, why is nobody talking about the defensive regression? Let's park on that here just for a moment. Buster asking, okay, everybody's fixated on the offense, but what about the fact that the Georgia defense the last couple of years has certainly not quite been up to the national championship standard it was in 2021 and 2022. Why is, he asks, no one talking about that? And I think that's a pretty fair question. And I would say for me, the answer is really twofold. And one of these statements, as I believe undeniably true, the second of these is, well, your mileage may sort of vary. So let's talk about the first. Part of the reason that people, I think, don't get fixated on what might be going on in the Georgia defense as much as they have been fixated on the Georgia offense is I think that everybody sort of fundamentally has an understanding of, well, 2021 was lightning in a bottle. That was laughable. Georgia's defensive depth in 2021 was comical. The fact that they were just rolling NFL bodies in and out of the game. Jalen Carter played as a backup on that team. I mean, some of y'all are probably better at doing the math than I do. Essentially, everybody that played on that defense is going to be in the NFL, and the majority of them, overwhelming majority of them, end up being first-round picks. That's just ridiculous. That is rarefied air that maybe nobody ever achieves again. So when you see a defense last couple of years that hasn't matched that, well, some of that is just sensible because perhaps no one will. Even in 2022, though, we've probably seen Georgia the last couple of years not quite play the same standard it played in 2022. And as far as why that's the case, for me it comes down to, and this is the part where some people may think I'm being, a little too flippant, others may agree. I simply think that in 2022, Georgia still had some remnants of the dominant defensive line. Obviously, mostly I'm talking about Jalen Carter here. Whereas in 2023, 2024, I think that Georgia was good, and I think the guys that played there individually were good players, but I just don't think that Georgia has added up to the same level of defensive line the last couple of years it had during its national championship era of 2021 and 2022, and that if Georgia can kind of replenish its defensive line and get a level of play that comes a little closer to matching that, not 2021 when you had number one overall pick and, the Bednarik Award winner and the Allen Trophy, like all the crazy stuff that Georgia had then. It doesn't have to be that good, but if the Georgia defensive line can kind of move in that direction, I believe that whatever questions people perhaps have about the Georgia defense are likely to be answered. Now, as I said before, there's a very good chance that some people hear that and say, oh, well, you're not being, hard enough, or you're not being, critical enough, or you're not, taking as deep as it needs to go. Perhaps that's the case. But my knee-jerk reaction is that Georgia's always sort of one fix away from kind of being back near the top of the country defensively, and that is sort of finding those first-round types when it comes to the defensive line. That's just my belief on that, which is why some of the chatter around Georgia right now is pretty interesting. And listen, we don't want to make more of this than needs to be because most of this is just sort of in fun. It's just sort of a nice way to let your mind wander, to kind of conjure your imagination a bit. But for the second time here in the last couple of weeks, we have now seen a former Georgia defensive lineman really speak very positively about a future Georgia defensive lineman, a guy beginning his Georgia career. And as I said, a lot of this is just sort of for fun, a little bit of maybe a hometown connection in some respects. But nonetheless, we like having fun around here. So when one former Dawg says something about a future Dawg, of course, we are going to gravitate towards that. Once again, it was Warren Brinson, as he goes through his pro day and gets ready to begin what we believe is a very promising NFL career. Brinson, once again, kind of talking about what he sees in the five-star freshman on his way to Georgia. Now here, obviously going through spring practice, Elijah Griffin. And yesterday at pro day, with Brinson speaking to the media, he made a very interesting comparison between Griffin and a guy that I mentioned a moment ago who's going to go down as one of the all-time greats to have played at Georgia and maybe right now one of the more dominant guys in the NFL overall. Listen to what Warren Brinson told reporters yesterday about the fact that Elijah Griffin coming in as the five-star. He says he's the next Jalen Carter. Here is proof from Brinson on that from yesterday.
Oh, no, yeah, the next year because watch this again. Next year, like, oh yeah.
Where did you see him play?
Who, Elijah? Oh, I saw him at practice yesterday.
Okay. Did you see him in Savannah?
I saw him at practice yesterday out here in Eastville. Yeah, he's legit.
So I love it. It's a short clip, and he's obviously just being casual. And as I said before, we're not trying to make this more than it needs to be. We're not trying to put undue pressure on Griffin or anything like that because, quote-unquote, next Jalen Carter is a pretty big thing to live up to. And Brinson, if you're not watching, he's smiling when he says, all of this is just meant to be in fun. But Brinson says, I saw him practice. This is the next Jalen Carter. And so there's always going to be a part of that that's just a little bit fun. And there's also an element of this that's really pretty important too, because if we would say the difference between Georgia defensively in 2023 and 2024 and what we saw in 2021 and 2022 was the overall quality and the depth of the Georgia defensive line, then having five-star guys like this coming in to help replenish that depth and kind of grow that depth, that does become really important. And this is obviously not the first time during this offseason, or even like the last couple of weeks, this is not the first time we've heard Warren Brinson say something like this. If you're going to go back to the NFL scouting combine. And once again, there's a hometown connection here because Brinson grew up in Savannah, and that's obviously where Elijah Griffin's from. Although Elijah, if he was sitting here right now, would tell you, listen, I'm from Pooler. You can think I'm from Savannah, but I'm from Pooler. That's what he would say. But nonetheless, Brinson obviously likes a lot about Elijah Griffin, saying, I saw him in the practice field, and going back to the combine saying, My impression of Griffin is also born out of what I've seen from him in the weight room during some of these winter workouts. Once again, strong stuff from Warren Brinson, matching what he said yesterday at Pro Day. Let's go back in time a couple of weeks.
I think who I think is going to really take over for the Georgia Bulldogs like this upcoming season that people aren't seeing coming is Elijah Griffin, the freshman coming in. Elijah, man, I've known Elijah since 8th grade, and you look out. Just look out.
What is about Elijah? I mean, he comes as a 5-star guy.
Yeah, our coaches have said that he's one of the best defensive line prospects they ever seen coming out of high school. And what I'm hearing about him in the weight room and what he's doing up there right now, it's matching the 5-star.
Listen, I don't know if that's true, but boy, I hope it is. Boy, I hope it is. And, I mean, listen, you always like the idea of that for the individual player, Griffin, but you also know the need for that when it comes to Georgia. And the truth is, as much as I do like Griffin, as much as I do respect Warren Brinson's opinion, I also think, well, when you look at UGA, elite recruits who've also been here for a year, you know, perhaps they have just a little bit more value and a little bit more chance of making an impact. I'm thinking about a Joseph Jonah-Janye and guys like that. I do think experience matters, but to have that sort of talent from an incoming freshman, and by the way, we've also heard, you know, similar praise for an Isaiah Gibson from other outlets and things like that. We've had plenty of talk lately about some of the interest and intrigue that exists when it comes to some of these highly rated defensive line recruits coming into Georgia. But maybe a little bit from these young guys, a little bit more from guys like Joseph Jonah-Janye. We talked about Jordan Hall, the emergence of Christen Miller, that all of this adds to what I believe could be kind of a little bit of a full-fledged return to form for the Georgia defensive line. And if that does happen, the Georgia defense kind of echoing some of its best performances in 2021, 2022, perhaps you do see more of that. You know, along those same lines, different former Georgia defensive linemen also talking yesterday about Nazir Stackhouse. Great career at Georgia, major impact player, guy played a lot of important snaps, even going back to, like, say, 2022. A bigger part of that national championship team than sometimes people, I think, remember. But either way, really solid Georgia career, really strong contribution to the program, now moving on. Good friends with, doing some workouts with Christen Miller. Miller, one of those guys that could have gone to the NFL draft this year, chose not to. And now kind of left behind at Georgia, ready to make his final impression on these scouts. And being next year where Stackhouse and Brinson are right now, on their way to the NFL. And that decision to return for UGA, the expectation is he can pay huge dividends too. Yesterday, Stackhouse talking not about the freshman the way that Warren Brinson was, but the veteran presence, Christen Miller, and how valuable he can be to UGA and what the next 12 months for him kind of look like. Here is Nazir Stackhouse talking about Christen Miller.
Oh, Christen, keep doing what you've been doing, man. Like, Christen's a great kid, very charismatic. Expressive, if you will, and a great ball player. When he puts his mind to it, he becomes a really good player on the field. And being on the field, there's been a lot of occurrences where, like, I see Chris, like, his whole mindset changes on the field, and that's the best thing that I've seen from him as a player, from when he was a recruit to now. I've seen, like, when he puts his mind to it, he goes out there, he handles business. So, but nah, Chris, keep doing your thing. Everything you've been doing up to this moment, it's got you where you need to be. So don't stop. Don't change anything that you've been doing, but just keep working hard, and you'll be here in Pro Day just like I am in a year from now, of course.
I think that's really well said. I think that's good stuff from Nazir Stackhouse. And let's sort of sum all this up. Let me kind of say it this way. We had a great question from a Georgia fan yesterday of how come there's more discussion about so-called regression on offense than there is regression on defense? Some of that is probably just the nature of football fandom, where there's a fixation on offense that doesn't exist for defense. But there's also, I think, just the simplistic explanation that while Georgia was probably solid up front defensively the last couple of years, it wasn't as dominant as it has been in the past. But it does have a chance to return to that form this year because of a combination of incoming freshmen like Elijah Griffin and Isaiah Gibson who've turned heads as they've made their progression into college, because of veterans like Christen Miller that Nazir Stackhouse is talking about, also guys like Jordan Hall and other names there that have Georgia looking at a list of possibilities that can give Georgia a chance to have a truly special defensive line. And if that defensive line takes that big step forward, my guess is the Georgia defense will follow suit as well. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We're happy you're with us, whether you get to us video, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 Ref, podcast, wherever you find them. And I tell you, man, it's been great to watch transition on podcasts. We had a lot of help, kind of behind the scenes here. Seems like that's been a smooth transition. The feedback we've gotten thus far has been great. So really appreciate all of that. We just love making the show as available as we can on as many platforms as we can, and that's obviously been a terrific thing. Huge thanks to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp who make today's show possible, your source for Georgia divorce. And I love talking about the former Dogs on their way to the NFL, the current Dogs going through spring practice, the future Dogs in recruiting. The conversations we have this time of year are always outstanding and so much fun. What is nowhere near as fun, and I know this, we don't hide from this, the divorce conversation is just a completely different tone. It's just a completely different vibe. But in an audience the size of ours, one of the things we try to be mindful of is there a lot of stories kind of represented by the various people who make up our viewers and our listeners, things like that. And statistically speaking, some of you are likely considering divorce. Maybe divorce has been kind of thrust on you, whether you chose it or not. Well, if you've got questions about the divorce process, Merriweather and Tharp wants to provide answers for you. And I want you to check out their website. It's georgiadivorceteam.com. That's georgiadivorceteam.com. The reason why that's their website is because that's who they're for. Georgians all across our state, wherever you might be. And when you reach out to Merriweather and Tharp, one of the things that's going to happen is sort of the first thing that'll take place is that kind of free initial consultation. You'll sort of talk to one of their attorneys, whether you're in like Savannah or Atlanta or Athens or Peachtree City, wherever you might be. You'll talk to one of those attorneys. You'll tell them your story. They'll listen. And then after that, you'll have a conversation about next steps. Is divorce right for you? Perhaps it's not. And if it's not, I can promise you they'll point you in that direction. If it is an unavoidable next step for you, they'll also walk with you through it to make sure that you're set up for success in that next season of your life. And after having handled a situation like this thousands of times, one of the things that our friends at Merriweather and Tharp have also learned is that one of the big categories of questions that come up is kind of the cost certainty of what's it going to cost me to complete this process. And I think that, our buddy Bob Tharp and his folks there have been really creative in coming up with an array of options to give you a lot of cost certainty about how you choose to kind of pay for this and get the cost certainty through all of this. They've been really wise with how they put that together. So a lot of things you can learn just by having a conversation. So if this feels like the next thing for you, reach out today online, georgiadivorceteam.com. One more time, that's georgiadivorceteam.com. Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, we got a lot today. Before we are done, we'll get into the Georgia basketball loss last night to Oklahoma. A few thoughts about this, both this game, kind of where Georgia goes from here. We'll do a lot of that here coming up in a moment. Also, Terrence Edwards returning back to the program here today. There's a lot to talk to Terrence about, including a couple of receivers at Georgia practice, whether it be spring practice or some of the stuff before that, really getting a lot of buzz right now. So we'll talk about that here coming up in just a little bit with Terrence. That's on the way. Prior to that, let's go around the doghouse here today. And, one of the things we said going back to, I guess it would have been Monday or Tuesday, I forget. We're kind of making some predictions about what we might hear from Kirby Smart in his introductory press conference for Georgia to kick off the spring. And one of the things that we sort of knew we would get, it seems like every year to kind of begin the spring, which in a lot of ways sort of begins the year for Georgia, at least in terms of kind of the on-field product, there's always sort of an overarching thematic message. You can almost kind of take it as a challenge to Georgia, a phrase or two that sort of sets the tone for where Georgia is right now. And near the end of Smart's press conference on Tuesday, by the way, you can go to the DawgNation YouTube page. You can see that Kirby Smart press conference in its entirety. Near the end of that, Kirby was asked directly about what it is he wants to learn from his team here during spring practice. And I thought that Kirby gave a really thoughtful and interesting answer. If you're a Georgia fan, I think you're going to really like this. I think it really works well as a challenge to Georgia, but also a little bit of sort of a mission and a value statement about kind of how this program exists in the current landscape of the sport overall. There is a lot in this. Let's hear Kirby Smart with what he wants to learn from his team here this spring. This is from Tuesday.
Yeah, I want to see the fire. I want to see the passion, the energy. I want to see who wants to be a good football player, who really cares about this game. Like, they care more about the game than they do about their NIL revenue stream. Like, if you really, really, really care about the game and you want to be good, it doesn't matter about any kind of money. It matters how I play the game. And more we're seeing across college football, the purest, the ones that care about the game the most, play the hardest. And usually the team that plays hardest wins. I know everybody thinks it's just whoever's more talented, but there's a whole lot to how hard you play and how much you care about it. So my goal is to find out, how hard do you want to play? How much do you really want to be great? Because if you do, it'll show by how you practice.
So I just think that's really good. And I think that for a lot of Georgia fans, they sort of think the same thing. It just sounds great. And something kind of popped in my head as I was listening to that honestly I hadn't thought about until just right this second. Going back a couple of weeks ago, I watched, and I think many of you did too, just because the ratings were huge. You know that four nations face-off in hockey where, like, America was battling Canada. There were a couple of other countries too, but it was like, America and Canada battling each other in this, ended up playing a couple times. U.S. won the first. Canada ended up winning the championship game. But America was sort of transfixed on this, right? I mean, people were tuning, even like me and a lot of you non-hockey fans were like tuned into this game. And I think the one statement you kept making over and over again is, okay, well, these are like sort of all-star type teams, international teams representing some of the very best players in the NHL. But unlike a lot of other all-star teams, certainly all-star games, certainly the NBA all-star game going around now near the same time, this just seems so meaningful because the players on the ice are obviously playing so hard that there is just something to, you just notice it when guys are playing hard. It's the kind of thing that becomes unmistakable and unavoidable. And I do think there's a little bit of an issue with that right now in college football, of not just at Georgia, but college football across the board, of, hey, how do you make sure that everybody is playing as hard as they can? How do you get that out of your program? And I just think you sort of know it when you see it. You recognize it when it's absent. It's just one of those things that just kind of exists in sports where, there are just some guys, some teams, in some cases, sort of some sports where playing hard is just a little bit more of a standard. Playing hard is just a little bit more of an expectation where, it's not always existing in full measure, in other places. And Kirby Smart says, listen, I want this team to be defined by how hard it plays. I want my guys to be defined by how hard you play. Because if you go out there and you sort of, halfway do it, if you go at three-quarter speed, it is going to be noticed. I want to see fire, passion, and energy from you. And honestly, I really believe that there is still a role in college football for coaching for that very reason. One of the things we've talked about with not just the kind of sort of out-of-fashion nature of spring games right now, but there are also a lot of coaches that also want to get rid of spring practice too. And what we've said about that is, well, listen, if you don't want to coach your guys during the spring, then what you're telling me is your value as a coach is somewhat limited. If you don't want to put hands on these guys and make them into more than they otherwise were, then as a coach, you're probably overrated. You're definitely overpaid. But in the case of Kirby Smart, I think he sees a value-add opportunity for himself and his staff to give the fire, passion, and energy, instill that into the players, take a talented guy and make him even better than he otherwise would be. We've said before, the sort of Kirby doctrine, if you will, is you got to have talented players, and you take those talented players and you make them physically and mentally tougher. And if you can do that, not talent alone, but also not the intangibles alone, you got to sort of instill the intangible qualities into the measurable talent. If you can do that, then you've got the makings of a great football team. Now, the other thing I'll say about this briefly, and then we're going to bring on Terrence Edwards, I did see some, like a little bit of, I mean, I guess people always find a way to criticize everything. I saw some online criticism a little bit for that statement from Kirby where people were saying, well, it's, imagine the highest paid coach in college football telling, other guys not to worry about telling his players not to worry about their money. And I just think that's a total misunderstanding of the situation. Look, the fact of the matter is that there is money, compensation for players here right now in a way that didn't used to exist in college football. But I think that in so many words, what Kirby Smart's saying here is, hey, just getting paid alone, that doesn't make you into a professional. That doesn't make you into a professional. And in fact, we use this phrase in our own life sometimes. You ever say, like, oh, man, that guy, he's a real pro. Or you've maybe heard this said about somebody else. Oh, that guy, oh, man, he's a pro. He's a pro. And when people say that, they're not referencing how much that particular person may be getting paid. They're referencing how that person goes about doing their job, doing their work. And so I think in the case of this, what Kirby Smart in so many ways is saying here is, okay, can you find a work ethic that matches your level of compensation? Because if you do, then the money that you're making now, you'll still have that same monetary value 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. That if you've got money and no work ethic, eventually you won't have money either. But if you've got work ethic and maybe no money, eventually you'll have all the money that you want. And there is still a role in college football for development, and Kirby Smart's still speaking very forcefully about his intent to provide that development. I think that speaks pretty well for Georgia. I think that's a great quote from Kirby Smart. And that is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. All right, as I said before, a tough night last night for Georgia basketball, but still a lot of hope for this Sunday with the selection show. So we'll get to that here in a little bit, including hearing Mike White from last night's game. But for now, didn't get a chance to speak to him last week. Thrilled about doing that today. Here is Terrence Edwards on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So Terrence not with us last week. He was on assignment. I think I'm okay with saying this. School trip up to Canada. Terrence, I trust that when you return to our neighbors to the north, you're greeted as a returning hero, CFL legend, kind of at the airport. They're there to greet you. I'm sure you get a nice warm welcome when you return home to Canada after your success up there playing football.
I did play 2 years in Montreal, and that's where we were on the school trip. But if we was in Winnipeg, I would have definitely got that warm welcome.
There you go. I love to hear that. So, I mean, obviously these school trips can be a lot of fun, right? I mean, it's like, there's kind of the fringe benefit of, you work at you're coaching, doing stuff like that, but you also get a chance to go up there and be a chaperone on a trip like that to Canada, and not a bad way to spend a week, right?
Yeah, it was fun. I had a really good time. I see now why I got back to Atlanta once the season was over in the Canadian Football League, because it was very cold. But watching the students have a great time, learn about a different culture, that what makes up for the weather. And 26 kids, we got all 26 kids back to Atlanta safe and sound.
That's the main thing right there. It's funny. I had a high school coach. Some teams travel and they go play games, and sometimes I'll have coaches tell me, listen, I ain't putting my kids in a hotel unless I absolutely have to. Like when you put high school kids in a hotel, like you find out what real work is. That's real work right there. When you're watching these kids, make sure they get where they're supposed to be and get back home and all that kind of stuff. And you certainly learned that lesson, right?
Yeah. So not sleeping deep is a priority, because if your phone rings in the middle of the night, you have to get up and go take care of that situation. So luckily we didn't have any situations, and I'm happy that the students had a great time and we got back safe and sound.
I'll get to the main topic here in a minute, but just one more thing real quick. You mentioned playing in Montreal for 2 years for the Alouettes. Do you speak French? Did you learn how to speak French when you were living up there?
Not one bit. I know that's about bon appetit. Is that is all of the French that I have in my repertoire.
Well, you're a coach. We just heard Kirby a moment ago say, hey, for my guys this spring, I want to see who has fire. I want to see who has passion. I want to see who has energy. I want to see who wants to play the game and who sort of cares about competition more so than compensation. And I think that's what a coach should want, right? I think that you want to teach work ethic to go along with the money that you make, so these guys that have this money can figure out a way to kind of keep that money over the course of their lifetime here. I think that stuff sounds really good from Kirby. I thought that was a really strong message to send as Georgia begins spring practice, and I'm guessing as a coach yourself, you probably liked it too.
No, I did. I think from the coach's perspective, that's what you want to hear. You want to see guys come out and play football and not worry about the factors that's non-football related. Then from the player perspective, which I was, we always, in this day and age, trying to worry about, my NIL and what I'm being compensated. So there's a lot of factors now that I didn't have to worry about as a Georgia football player that all college football players is worried about. Now it's kind of, they're a brand now. These kids are a brand, that they're their own entity within the Georgia brand. So they're going to worry about what they feel like they deserve. But I've always said as a professional, and I say it now, when you win, you get more opportunity to earn more money. No losing team really earns all SEC honors, all American honors. That goes to the winning team. So once you win and play up to your potential, all the outside factors will take care of themselves.
So one of the things I love this time of year are like rumors, and obviously a lot of this stuff gets overblown because there's certainly an appetite for people to hear good things about Georgia players. But if you want to go back to the early part of the winter during winter workouts, things like that, this is unofficial stuff. Man, ton of buzz from people behind the scenes about Noah Thomas transferring here from Texas A&M. Early spring practice stuff, kind of confirming the athleticism of Zachariah Branch. In the early portion of this calendar year, both Branch and Thomas just generating a ton of buzz right now. What do you think about these two guys? A little bit different. In the case of Thomas, it's a really big body dude. In the case of Branch, just a dynamic athlete who perhaps hasn't always, sort of achieved at his full potential at USC, but shown flashes from time to time. What do you make of these two transfer receivers, Terrence? I just think that there's a lot of chatter about them right now.
Yes, I think that's the reason we brought them here. I'm very excited about those two. I'm excited about this room, man. If you saw a tweet that I posted yesterday when Kobe Young got cleared, and we know that he's going to be available, and I don't know which position they're going to play, X or Z, so I just put what I thought. I thought, Noah Thomas would be an X at 6'6", and Kobe be a Z at 6'4". Then you have a slot and Branch. And I think getting Dylan Bell back into that utility space would definitely bring back the fire that we saw 2 years ago when he was a running back, when they just put him on the field in all spaces to get him the ball. I think get back to that with him. I think Sokovia, I think Nitro, I think CJ, I think about Thailand. So I think this group, and I think they were so much maligned last year, I think they're going to have a different fire and different focus, because as a receiver, you never want to get that label as having the most drops as a team. I think the focus from that group would be a little bit different in the spring, and it's different players. And I'm just excited to see what these new guys bring to the table.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you more about what you'd said there, because you talked about kind of spreading those big bodies out along the receiver formation, and that's obviously a defensive challenge, of course. And I'm thinking about, if I'm Gunnar Stockton here, who we presume is going to be the starting quarterback for Georgia, getting him acclimated and getting him kind of off to a good start this season. To me, and I don't want to oversimplify this, but just sort of keeping in simple terms, that a taller receiver is a little easier of a target, right? He has a chance to go up high point the football, above who might be guarding him. Now, of course, in the SEC, cornerbacks are getting taller and taller too, but the taller receiver creates the easier target, and perhaps in some cases some safer throws. And if I'm looking to get Gunnar off to a good start this year, as many good, easy, safe throws as possible, the bigger guy gives you a chance to do that, right?
Right. And I think, and I'm not joking at all, I really think Gunnar should call Aaron Murray and go and talk to Aaron, because I think Aaron was the best back shoulder fade thrower in Georgia history. He was able to just put the ball in spots to allow the big receivers that he had in Marlon Brown and AJ in spots that only they can get it. having two guys that are 6'6" and 6'4", you got to look at their wingspan as well. So not just alone them being taller receivers, just their wingspan alone allows them to just have the ability to catch the ball at the highest point. And I don't care if you're a 6-foot corner, 6'1", the receiver should win that if the ball is put in the right spot. So just having two tall guys out there, the ball placement doesn't have to be perfect. You just put it in a spot to give them the ability to catch the football, and that is a higher percentage throw, even though it is a low percentage throw in theory because it's farther down the field.
I think that's really interesting. Let me ask you more about Branch here for a moment. You know, I remember his debut as a college player, I guess, to start the 2023 season, and you talk about electric as a returner and as a receiver both. This was one of the real exciting athletes I think I saw in that particular season. And for whatever reason, the last couple of years, you know, the full 2023 season and last year, maybe not always matching that at USC. Tell me how, from the perspective of a former player yourself, how a change of scenery might help Branch bring out more in himself. Because obviously that must be what he's thinking, or otherwise he wouldn't have transferred. You know, he clearly likes the idea of a new location, kind of bringing out something new in him. How could the change of scenery perhaps help Zachariah here this year?
You know, you just don't know you're not in the building at SC. So using his skill set is a big thing. He's not the biggest, but he's very electric with the ball in his hand. So being able to match him up against safeties, linebackers, or a nickel corner, it's going to be very beneficial to him. I just think his biggest weapon for me is being able to use him in a punt return game. I just think that is a different form of offense because if we can average 10 yards, that's the first down and the field position flips. Yeah. So I'm looking at it from a special team standpoint, that he's able to flip the field and give us maybe shorter fields. We know what our field goal kicking is like. So if you put us in position to kick field goals at a higher rate, even though, you know, we don't want field goals, but we have a very reliable kicker. So his playmaking abilities from a specialty standpoint is what I'm looking for, along with his ability just to get the ball in his hands. We know in this day and age, and people are going to kill Bobo for it, but I'm a big screen guy myself. I love getting the ball into playmakers' hands and allow him to make people miss, or it's an extension of the running game. That's one thing that people don't see. If we throw a screen and only get 4 yards, and this comes from the mouth of Todd Monk, and I had a great conversation with him about screen game. He sent me all of his screens, and he said, Terrence, screens are meant to get playmakers the ball. That's number one. If he hasn't gotten the ball in 3 series, just throw him a screen out there so he can feel the football. That's number one. And it meant to get, if it get 1 yard, it's a positive yard. So, you know, we all kill Coach Bobo for the screens, but if you talk to Todd Monken about his screen game and what he think about throwing screens, he loves throwing screens just to get the ball into playmakers' hands for one, and it's also an extension of the running game. So I'm looking forward to just him getting the ball in his hand, because he is a dynamic runner with the ball in his hand.
And I also think, too, it's like you watch the NFL, I think that people sometimes assume, and listen, I don't pretend to be a coach or anything like that, but I think sometimes people have this assumption that in the NFL, the big armed quarterbacks are just throwing deep all the time. But honestly, Terrence, you watch a lot of, I mean, Patrick Mahomes never throw. I mean, it's like a few yards down the field at most, and they're just marching down the field doing exactly what you described, whether you call them screens or not. It's short throws, easy completions. Playmakers have a chance to make somebody miss. These are the most prolific offenses in the NFL, and most of them almost never throw deep.
Yeah, so I always tell people to go back and look at Tom Brady last 2 Super Bowls in New England, not the one in Tampa Bay, and look who had the most receptions out of the receiving threats. And I'll tell you before you go answer. One was James White. I think James White may have had like 13 receptions because it was option routes out the backfield with the running back. Tom Brady did not throw the ball deep very much. They threw the ball 15 yards and under. And then once the defense allows you to throw it deep, he did throw it deep. But football should be played 15 yards and under. But everyone is, wants to throw the ball deep, want to show off the big arm. I'm the guy as an offensive coach. I'm getting completions and moving the chain and scoring points instead of trying to be just throw it up and go get it. Yes, there's going to be opportunities where you take a shot downfield, but you take what the defense give you. If that's a screen, a flare, a hitch, a slant, let's just get completions and move the chain.
I think it's really interesting. Speaking of throwing the football, one of the best things about the Georgia Pro Day yesterday, our Cody Chafin did a great job on this. We got a chance to get a long look at Gunnar Stockton throwing the ball. In fact, I think we have some of this we can show here right now. You know, Terrence, you watch the game different than we do. When you watch Gunnar as a quarterback, and obviously, people are going to be looking at him closely this spring. Those lucky enough to see practice. Of course, there'll be some media out there today on G-Day. People will be looking forward to watching this more closely. What do you see when you watch Gunnar Stockton right now?
So the one thing that I've noticed and have watched from afar, even when he was in high school, and I think this is what made Stetson Bennett so good, because he was a leader of men in that locker room. And everyone in that locker room, and Nolan Smith has said this 1,000 times, all those players in that locker room believed in Stetson Bennett. They believed they would run through a brick wall for Stetson Bennett. And I think that's the same type of leadership that Gunnar is going to bring. If you just watch how he got hit in that Texas game, that's let you know that a lot of this means what it means to him. And the defensive side of the ball is going to stand up for that. If my quarterback is going to put it on the line, we have to put it on the line too. And I just think his leadership in the locker room is going to bring back what Stetson brought to the table. Not saying that Carson didn't, because I don't know, but I've heard from plenty of people how that whole locker room just loves Stetson. And I think Gunnar bring that same type of characteristics as a football player.
I think that's really well said. Terrence, always love the football conversation with you. Of course, Terrence Edwards, wide receiver academy. You mentioned great stuff on social media. You're always posting your thoughts on Georgia football and the game overall. That's really valuable, but you're also working with the next generation of pass catchers too. For people who want more on that, how can they get in touch with you?
Yes, you can find me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrence, great stuff. Thanks for your time. We'll look forward to talking to you soon. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
If you're watching on video, you saw the Gunnar Stockton stuff. And by the way, if you're listening podcast, it is worth going to our DawgNation YouTube page. We have a nice isolated video of Gunnar throwing at Pro Day. And I just think it's a really good chance to acquaint yourself with him a little bit more. And I tell you, as I watch this video, we'll get to everything else in a minute, and maybe I'm making more of this, and it's obviously, a little bit of a slow motion video, so it kind of changes the countenance a little bit. But to me, the facial features of Stockton look a little different in this than maybe some of the stuff that you've seen from him in the past. Or I'm also thinking about those dog walk videos that we'll do. And oftentimes, Gunnar would kind of come in with a hat on. That was sort of his kind of, I guess, shtick a little bit. But he always had the big smile on his face and, always kind of I don't know. There's a certain just aura that Gunnar's given off. To me, and if you're watching on video, you see this right now, that's a different aura. And maybe I'm reading into this because he is about to be the Georgia starting quarterback. But that's not the same face that I feel like we've seen from Gunnar before. That's a much more serious face. Now, he's also throwing to these guys at Pro Day. They've got money on the line. He's trying to help them. So he's obviously very serious about his task. But this is not the sort of like, aw shucks, just happy to be here kid that I think has been endearing to many fans going back to the time that he was in high school. This is a guy who's obviously very serious about his craft and I think wants to reintroduce himself in an even greater way to people here in 2025. I think it's a really interesting video. Oftentimes, video tells a story in a way that words can't, and I say that as someone who just sort of vomits out endless numbers of words all day long. Really, really compelling video from Gunnar Stockton. Ought to go check that out at our DawgNation YouTube page. It is something close to an exclusive. So good stuff there on that. Speaking of exclusive, boy, you get an exclusive opportunity here coming up in just a couple of weeks, many of you, hundreds of you anyway, to be a part of our DawgNation cruise. as we set sail on Utopia of the Seas. And it is just the latest example of sort of new things when it comes to Royal Caribbean. Right for now, Utopia of the Seas, the newest of the ships in that Royal Caribbean fleet. And new ships means new concepts. If you're watching a video a moment ago, you saw the Pesky Parrot. That's kind of a new bar concept that sort of exists right there in the Royal Promenade. I think it's really well themed. It's awesome. And so many fun things on board Utopia of the Seas, and kind of just rolling right along with what's going to be a whole series of debuts from Royal Caribbean here in 2025. We're only a few months away from Star of the Seas. And if you like all the stuff that Utopia is showing you, like the View Bar and all that kind of stuff, imagine what Star of the Seas is going to have in store for us when it debuts later on this summer as we move towards the end of 2025. Not just new ships debuting, but think about the new Royal Beach Club there at Paradise Islands in the Bahamas. You know, I'm really excited about the fact that it's not open yet, but when we sail to Nassau as part of our DawgNation cruise, this will be our first chance to even get eyes on what's going to be the brand new Royal Beach Club. I'm looking forward to seeing that, because I think for those who've sailed to Nassau before, sort of feel like they've been there and done that, this is going to be a game changer in the experience, and it's only going to be exclusively for those on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Of course, we're going to start looking a little bit more into the future. The next in the Icon class of ships, after Star of the Seas debuts, we're going to have Legend of the Seas coming up. Going to be sailing out of what the Meridian, not Meridian. Mediterranean, and then obviously making its home at Port Everglades and Fort Lauderdale after that. So much fun new stuff coming from Royal Caribbean. Jessica Slater, great travel agent. She can tell you all about it. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Okay, so let's bounce to a couple stories here, and then we'll get to Georgia basketball before we're done. There was reporting this week that the FCC, that's the Federal Communications Commission, got numerous complaints from ESPN's College Game Day this year because of foul language that Nick Saban was using on air. And this is one of those things where I am just a lot different than many of you. A lot of you think we're way too, family friendly around here. We, just too, corny or whatever. But I don't make any apologies for that whatsoever. We run a clean show. I think sports talk ought to be clean. And, not to say there's not a place for like the bar stools and stuff like that, but I don't think that everything has to be Barstool. And I don't think that, as much as this is hard for people to imagine, I don't know that Pat McAfee needs to be on every show on television. Perhaps maybe we could have a show in which Pat McAfee's not on. Not to say that people aren't right to like McAfee. He's obviously a charismatic personality. But perhaps not everything in sports has to be Barstool and McAfee. Perhaps there's an option to have something a little bit more family friendly. And listen, I do get that Saban's a coach, probably, authentic for him to go on there and use a bunch of foul language. But this is just not what I want College Game Day to be. It's just not, And in this day and age, and I don't have any market research that backs this up, but I'm assuming a lot of what's sort of still propping up Game Day as a show, people like me that sort of grew up with Game Day being the biggest deal in the world, now kind of sharing that with our kids. I'm assuming that's a huge part of the Game Day audience, of people who feel a certain sense of nostalgia for the show, now sort of sharing that with the next generation of college football fans. And we don't want Nick Saban cursing every 5 seconds. Plus, after a while, it's just not even edgy. It's just boring. It's like, what Jerry Seinfeld, some of these comics have sort of made a living telling clean jokes that anybody can kind of get a rise out of an audience. Anybody can kind of go viral on social media using foul language. Like, at a certain point, that becomes a little bit of a cheap pop almost. So I'm not telling you this is the biggest deal in the world. I'm not telling you that I'm not scandalized by it. I'm just kind of annoyed by it. I think there's too much bad language on sports TV right now. And I think that College Game Day, in my mind, is one of the worst offenders here. So the fact that people have taken the time to write the FCC about this, I don't hate it. Let me just say it that way. I don't hate it. Weird story coming out of Las Vegas, obviously a lot of those typically, but this one involves college football, where Dan Mullen is the new coach at UNLV. And UNLV has announced that I guess they have Mullen signed to a 5-year deal, but currently they only have enough money to pay for 2 of those years. And, part of me wants to joke and say, well, listen, by year 3, you'll be tired of him anyway, so you don't have to worry about that too much. But a couple of things that go on here. And I feel like a jerk for saying this, but you talk about, it was only about 5 years ago. And I remember doing these shows, all these people, back before ESPN was cursing every 5 seconds, all the people on ESPN, everywhere you turn, boy, Dan Mullen is just the best coach in college football. He may not recruit as well as Kirby Smart, but he can coach circles on him around him on the field, and what a genius he was, best play caller in the sport. And here we are just 5 years later, and Dan Mullen's new job, the people are like, well, we can only pay you for 2 years. After that, I don't really know. You talk about a star that has fallen. I don't take pleasure in saying that. But you want to talk about a star that has fallen. This is a star that has greatly, greatly fallen. On a slightly more serious note, I do worry about this a little bit. There are a lot of college football programs that are hanging on by a thread. They just don't have very large fan bases. They are solely dependent on the little tiny bit of money they get from, ESPN. UNLV is not playing a lot of these sort of non-conference games, the sort of buy games where you go get the contract. I guess they do some of that. Like a lot of, college football is a lucrative business, but it is not a profitable business for a lot of the programs who participate in it. And if the wind blows in the wrong direction, some of these programs are just going to go away. And Las Vegas is a very busy place. They got the Raiders now. They're about to have a Major League Baseball team in a couple of years. They got a hockey team. There's a lot going on in Las Vegas. If UNLV disappeared tomorrow, it'd take 6 months for anybody to notice. And, I do just sort of worry about that, these programs that are just sort of barely hanging on. And listen, some of this is probably poor mouthing and, whatever else, but it's also at least born in some measure of reality. There are a lot of kids that depend on these programs' existence for their scholarship or for their chance to play. And I don't know, man. You hate the idea of some of these mid-major sort of group of 5 teams turned into a Spirit Halloween store, but I just wonder if we're not heading to a future in which some of that's likely going to happen. So I laugh at Dan Mullen because his new job, they don't have enough money to pay him. He's going to get a Starbucks gift card for a salary. But I also kind of worry for the future of college football if one of the better group of 5 teams is just sort of financially speaking barely hanging on. What does that mean for the future? I do worry about that. Yesterday, we're going to talk about the ESPN kind of look at the teams in its top 25 and kind of from the SEC and what they're dealing with here this spring. We kind of ran out of time on that. It's already 10:55 now. We'll push that again tomorrow because I do want to talk basketball here for a moment. So let me do that instead and say we'll call that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I did get one of our YouTube commenters yesterday got mad at me for always cutting the cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean short. We're not going to do that too much, but today we are kind of out of time here a little bit, and I do want to get to the basketball thing before it gets too much later. So last night, Georgia loses very late in the SEC basketball tournament. A couple of things here before we get to the serious part of this. First of all, I confessed this morning to our video audience when we came on the air. I did not see the end of this game. I was staring at the back of my eyelids before this game came to a conclusion. This one started pretty late for me. I had no chance to stay awake, and frankly, I didn't even really try. On the couch, just fell asleep, woke up to find out that Oklahoma had won the game. I also, last Saturday, sort of stumbled into I didn't realize there was this much conjecture around the Georgia basketball uniform. Like, I don't like them very much. To me, and there's a lot of this in college basketball right now, sort of what I think of as sort of a brutalist style. Kind of reminds me of sort of a mid-century government office building, just very, very Spartan, very, very plain, just not a whole lot of, prestige to that, I don't think. Not very classic. Well, come to find out, a lot of people agree that they don't like those uniforms very much. However, I did not realize that Georgia had had so much success wearing them. This whole conversation I stumbled into, did not realize it was as sort of well established as it was. And so I saw a bunch of people online was like, well, now that they've lost in these uniforms, maybe they'll stop wearing them. But we'll see about that. But as far as the game itself goes, a couple of thoughts from me as it relates to this. Thing number one is Georgia in the second half has happened to it what has happened a lot this year. Long stretch without scoring. Obviously, the Oklahoma shooter was so hot last night as a team. They're just draining every three. Georgia goes, about 8 minutes in the late part of this game without scoring? And that's kind of been the issue for Georgia this year. These long offensive droughts in the second half kind of ruining any chance to win the game. And listen, when they make the NCAA tournament field and when they play next week, I can't guarantee you that won't happen then either. There's obviously a possibility that this is just the sort of connective tissue from game to game for this team this year, and it's going to show up in the big dance the same way it showed up in the SEC tournament and has shown up a lot during the regular season. That very well may happen. However, I still think that Georgia, even if that is ultimately the undoing for this team and if their season ends because of that, the fact that during the regular season they found a way to kind of close it out by winning 4 straight games and getting to the tournament, honestly, whatever happens from here, I think that Georgia has a right to declare a successful season. I really do. I know the second half drought is a little bit frustrating, but they won the games they needed to get to the NCAA tournament. And when you're talking about like a full decade of having done that, you have to consider that a success. And so for the most part, that's what I'll do. I'll also say this, that if you want to be really positive here for a moment, I do think in the midst of this game, even with it being a loss for Georgia, I do think you see some reason for optimism for why perhaps, Georgia may have a chance to actually win a game once we learn who its opponent is going to be. The truth is, one of the cool developments for Georgia in the winning streak that ultimately resulted in its inclusion in the tournament is the emergence of Silas Demery. Now, Demery gets in foul trouble late last night, but it was another really strong game for him. When you pair him with the other stuff that Georgia does well, all of a sudden you see the building blocks for what could result in at least one win in March Madness, perhaps getting into that first weekend. Demery's been great for Georgia as of late, and his, having to leave the game last night, one of the reasons that kind of got Georgia in some trouble. I'm also going to say this too. I think that Asa Newell, as a kind of elite recruit, sort of one and done kind of, NBA type prospect, I think that sometimes Newell is a little less spectacular than some Georgia fans perhaps expected him to be or hoped that he would be. But I do still think that Newell is having a really good year for Georgia. What do you have? 17 rebounds last night. Some of those are putbacks. That is the dirty work that just keeps you in a tournament game. And I do think that while Newell's not always as flashy and spectacular as the sort of 5-star type freshman is perhaps, in your mind supposed to be, Newell is a huge reason why they're going to the NCAA tournament. His presence in the front court, I think, really matters. And the work that he does on the glass gives you a chance to win. And for some context here, we don't talk a lot of Rutgers basketball on the show, but, Rutgers has got 2 lottery picks on their team right now. And they lost to USC last night in the Big Ten tournament. They're not going to the NCAA tournament at all. So, this idea that the sort of elite recruit, one and done, NBA first round lottery pick type guy always guarantees success. We see examples in college basketball right now of that not necessarily being true. So I think there's actually a lot to like about Newell, even if he's not showing up in your highlight reel, maybe as much as you expect. I think he's doing some real nasty business for Georgia down there in the paint. And I do think that's an important part of any chance to win. So the pairing of like Newell and Demery, you'd love for Blue Cane to have a hot shooting night. I do think that gives Georgia a bit of a chance, no matter who it ends up facing. And some of these bracketology projections have Georgia facing a pretty tough road. But nonetheless, we would think that Georgia might have a chance to win. As far as Mike White's assessment of how it played out last night, this is the coach after the game.
We just lost to an NCAA tournament team who has the potential to beat most teams in the country. And analytically, it's our worst loss. I mean, think about that. That's how good our league is. That's how good our schedule's been. We went in today in the SEC tournament, and of all the teams that played today, the metrics will tell you that we're the best team. The numbers will tell you that. Obviously, we just got beat. by a team that played better than we did. And I hope that they make a great run. I hope all of our SEC teams make a big run here in March. But the level of opponents that we've played all year, the fact that we got 20 in the regular season, the fact that we played Marquette pretty close, you beat St. John's, you win your last 4, you're playing as well coming into the SEC tournament as anyone in the SEC, in the best league in the history of college basketball. Our metrics are terrific. We continue to improve throughout the entire year. We've got a ton of youth and not much winning experience. And these guys learned how to obtain some of that winning experience. And I'm proud for our group. It's my favorite group I've ever been around. I could literally call practice at midnight tonight. We'd probably have pretty good practice.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think that even after the loss to Oklahoma, I think that White deserves to feel okay about the job that he's done and the team that he has. Like I said before, going on that winning streak to conclude the regular season, that's not nothing, especially given the history of Georgia basketball. And I believe it's enough to get them into the NCAA tournament, maybe as a 10 seed with a chance to, as we said, your chance of making the Sweet 16 as a 10 seed, probably better than it is as a 9, although your first round task usually just a little bit tougher. So we'll see. Selection Sunday is going to be fun. We do expect Georgia to be included. Something else that might be fun is the subject for our golden shoe today. Yesterday, apparently Kirby Smart making his way out to Pasadena for a photo shoot as a part of the cover, I guess. There'll be multiple covers here, but we're seeing the sort of deluxe edition cover of EA Sports College Football 2026 video game. Collection of players there. Also, bottom left corner, you see Kirby Smart along with Harry Dawg showing up too. So apparently Kirby is going to be among those on the cover for the brand new EA Sports College Football video game. I'd say that's pretty good currency. Obviously, the game is incredibly popular. You want to be top of mind for recruits, so probably not a bad thing that Kirby Smart sort of shows up on the cover there. I know a lot of Georgia fans were excited about that, so we'll give Kirby a golden shoe and Harry Dawg a golden shoe for showing up on that as well. Lousy, stinking Gators. Dan Mullen, they don't have to worry about him anymore, but they got problems of their own even after that. About 1,587 days. That's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia in football. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. Back tomorrow to close out the week strong. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. Probably a little bit of a quick bounce to the comment section today. I got a couple things I got to do, but there you go. Very good. It's a very good point. Cody Chafin's our producer. $1 Million Eddie holding on to his money right now, not looking to give any of that to Dan Mullen. Dan Mullen, a big part of Eddie's origin story, but Eddie not willing to part with any of his $1 million here. So very well said, Cody Chafin's. And no, Eddie is holding on to that money. Poor Dan Mullen's going to have to try to get his paycheck coming from somewhere else, I reckon. Jonathan Aaron asking about the thing we joked about at the top of the program. We said at the very beginning of the show, there will be no talk about Snapchat or anything you may have seen on Snapchat on today's show. That is just not my lane. And in life, it is very important to stay in your lane. And who is dating whom and what is found on these, Snapchat-type platforms, that is content I am more than happy to cede to somebody else. I am more than happy to give that over to somebody else. Jay Shipes calls me the language police, or perhaps he's saying that about FCC and the language police. Listen, goodness knows, the kind of language Jay must be using on a regular basis. I'm sure it would, make a sailor blush. But I'm just sort of old school in that fashion. Like, does TV have to be that way? I mean, listen, it's not to say I don't watch movies and things like that. I watch, TV dramas, things like that. They got all kinds of language. I mean, not everything I consume is necessarily, G-rated or even PG-rated, not necessarily. But I just kind of come from the standpoint there's a certain broadcast standard, and, Saban cursing every 5 seconds. Oh, he said a bad word. I just find that to be so Stupid. Let's see what else. Tyrone Brown says he thinks that Carson Beck will have a great season. Perhaps he will. Perhaps he will. I'll be honest. I really don't know, if you want to just keep it to football for a moment, I really don't know what to make of Carson Beck. I have a lot of really complicated feelings about Carson. And like the one thing that we do, I think a lot of you suspect this is true, and I'll confirm that it is. The one thing that we really try to do on this show, just because I'm a lot older than these guys are, I try to give the players every possible benefit of the doubt. I really do. I'm a big believer in second or even in some cases third chances, fourth chances. Whatever goes on with these guys, I work really hard to provide the most generous explanation possible for it. And not lying or not making stuff up or anything like that, but just trying to find the most favorable lens to view these very young guys through. And not every player is that quite as easy for as it is for others. And I would say that overall, long-standing time at UGA, I have some fairly complicated feelings about what Carson Beck was, who Carson Beck is. But I still think there's the possibility that he's a really good football player. I don't 100% know why it wasn't always better for Georgia this past season. I really don't. But I do think there's a chance he could have a really good season. To be honest, I also think there's a chance he doesn't. I think that both outcomes are a possibility for him. I really do. Let's see what else. Spencer Clark says he wants to see a 1,000-yard back, if not 2. Well, I don't know if I can get you 2 this year, but I do believe that Frazier goes over 1,000 this year. I believe that's probably the case. I believe that's probably the case. Jim Kay says, fixing the offensive line issues would be key on that. I don't disagree with that at all. Do not disagree with that at all. UJ Marine on the subject of SEC baseball. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun here this year. Let's see what else. DT mentioning something I had heard, that Soto ended up leaving the Yankees and going to the Mets because, in addition to like the $8 gazillion contract, he wanted a luxury suite for his family, and the Yankees said no. The Mets said yes. I did hear that. I don't know if that's true, but I did hear that, which is really strange, just given the sheer amount of money. And I think it also sort of, like those of us who don't have millions of dollars, I think we assume that having millions of dollars changes everything. But it really doesn't change all that much. That if the Soto story is true, that after being given just like gobs of money, he was offended because he also didn't get a luxury suite that he easily could have purchased with the money that he was making. It just goes to show you that there is something going on inside of people, a level of motivation that just doesn't have much to do with money. That you might think, well, if I had money, I wouldn't care what anybody thought. But boy, that doesn't quite always seem to be the case, does it? All right, what else? Savannah Bryan on the subject of the Braves. Yeah, look, I will say that I am not very optimistic about the Braves right now. I want to say that their projections have them somewhere around 92 wins. I would assume it's less than that. If I had to make an assumption, that would be my assumption, is they win fewer games this year than they're projected to. The big issue is going to be, can you tread water at the beginning of the season until you get, healthy guys back? And can you get healthy guys back over the course of the year and then make a run after that? That's what the real issue for Atlanta is going to end up being. And if they can, I mean, we've already seen, we've seen a Braves team barely slip into the playoffs. They won the World Series. We've seen a Braves team thunder its way through a season, the most explosive offense maybe of all time, or certainly modern times. And they got summarily dismissed from the playoffs just as quick as they got there. So postseason baseball is a crapshoot. I think it's incredibly entertaining, but it is not the same sport as the regular season. So if you can just find a way into the tournament, well, you got yourself a chance. And so I think that's Atlanta's best bet. I don't view this as a division-winning team. I assume that Philadelphia is probably better. I just don't know. I just don't know. But if you can make the playoffs, I guess you got a chance. Randy Hall's been doing a thing lately with his sort of all-time guys. He says, how about your all-time defensive line? You can make a case that Georgia's all-time defensive line all played fairly close together at the same time. And of course, I know guys like Richard Seymour and others became Pro Football Hall of Famers, but, I mean, you could at least make the case that Georgia's all-time defensive line was all at the same time. Let us see what else. Savannah Bryant says the Braves are going to lose 100 games. Now, I don't think that's true at all. I don't think that's – they are still going to have too much starting pitching for that. I really don't think they're going to lose 100 games. I don't. As I said before, I think they're lower than – I think they're high 80s. I think their ceiling for wins is probably high 80s. But if you can find your way to 87, 88, 89 games, sneak into the playoffs perhaps, maybe have something happen once you get there. Let us see what else. SEM Dog says that watching Gunnar throw, he said he seemed to have less of the long looping windup he had in the Sugar Bowl. I hope that's right. It'll help avoid a few sacks and lead to more completions. Yeah, maybe so. And I've heard other people say that before about Stockton, kind of a longer release. I don't know that I'd necessarily see it to be as concerning as some people have. I do think he's got a little bit of a unique throwing motion, but yeah. And look, obviously on the one big blow-up play, I don't know that was Stockton not getting rid of in time. He fairly well got swallowed before he even had a chance to do anything. But I get the point that you're making. To me, the video is worth watching. If you just want to see zoomed-in video of what your starting quarterback looks like throwing the ball for a fairly extended period of time, I think it's pretty valuable. I really do. It's worth going to check out. And different people are going to make different evaluations, which is sort of what makes kind of interesting. All right, let me go to Facebook here for a minute, see how they're doing. On the Facebook side of things here today, the original video platform, still holding strong. By the way, Tennille Calvino, I've said before, my favorite compliment, the thing that I strive to in life more than anything else is to be tan. Tennille noticing I already got a little tan going on. I appreciate that, Tennille. I like to be outside. When I can be outside, I want to be. And I hate the winter because it's hard to be outside, but I do like to be outside. So I've been swinging the golf club a little bit lately. Now, listen, my golf swing looks terrible right now, terrible. But I still like to be outside swinging it. So I've been doing a little bit of that, a lot of baseball, just try to be outside as much as I can. But Tennille, it thrills me that you noticed. Thrills me. On a more serious note, Robert Brown writes in to say that he recently lost his daughter to cancer. Says she loved watching the Dawgs with our family. Says, please keep our family in your prayers. My baby girl would say, hell yeah, go Dogs, woof woof. Robert, man, I am so sorry to hear that. I know how, I don't know, but I can only imagine how painful that experience must be for you. And it means a lot to me that you would be here with us, that you would share your story. We like hearing your stories. We want to be a part of all of this with you, so that the fact that you're a part of our audience, really appreciate that. We will be praying for you. That is an incredibly sad thing to deal with. But I know a lot of people in this comment section value your presence here, and I know they like to interact with you. And so I hope that you feel that friendship and warmth from them. I know it only provides a certain degree of comfort, obviously, because of what you're dealing with is such an intense story. But I do hope it does provide some comfort to you. And the fact that you would come back and be with us after you've been through that, I can tell you that means a lot to me. I really appreciate that. I mean, I don't mean that try at all. I really appreciate the fact that you would do that. I just am very sorry for your loss. I am, Robert, but I appreciate you sharing that. And I know you're seeing a lot of love in the comment section here right now. We'll read a couple more comments here. How about our buddy Isha Murphy, who's going to be on our Dawg Nation cruise, writing in to say, hopefully I can catch the show tomorrow. I'm getting ready to go on a cruise on Saturday. Might be busy. I love that moment, kind of pre-cruise, the excitement that you feel just before you get on. You're getting those final things taken care of. I love all of that. Isha's also coming on our Dawg Nation cruise this year. So, Isha, I'm glad for you. Hope you have a great time. Grady Darcy sharing some love. Kirk Schultz sharing some love as well. And I knew that'd be the case for our audience. I knew that would be the case. All right. A couple more comments. We'll get ready to get out of here. Got to go for today. Let me pop over and get a couple of YouTubers at it before we go. Also, our folks on YouTube sharing some love for Robert. I appreciate that. Appreciate that. Let's see what else. Jim K mentioning like the Vandegrift Beck competition. In 2023, I think that was a real competition. And I think that Vandegrift gave it a real run for his money. I do believe he got a long look from Georgia. Ultimately, Beck won the competition. And in 2023, I think you would have said that looks like a really good decision. For whatever reason, and it's easy to assume what the reasons were, but for whatever reason in 2024, Beck just seemed like a different guy. And boy, it's just hard not to notice that. Now, listen, much the same way we're kind of hoping, hey, change of scenery for this guy is going to make a big difference coming to Georgia. Perhaps for Beck, going somewhere else, change of scenery makes a big difference for him. It certainly could. Certainly could for sure. But, as I said before, my feelings about Carson Beck are pretty complicated. I'm not going to trash him on his way out the door, but there was a lot that I thought that, that Beck could have provided Georgia that he didn't. I'm also really grateful that he played as well as he did down the stretch against Tech. I did not want to lose that game. Beck helped prevent that from happening. He came back in the game post-injury in the SEC championship. Those are actually pretty fond memories. And, this is really kind of what life is. It is a collection of good and bad things, and that's kind of my overall feeling when it comes to Beck. Foster Moss says, we may wrap up with this. You think Dylan Bell's going to move to halfback full-time with all the injury to the running backs? If I had to guess, and this is just my guess, what you see from Dylan this year is maybe not like full-time wide receiver or kind of full-time running back, but somebody who gets to be the kind of gadget player that, and I don't mean that in any way like pejoratively, but he gets to be the creative weapon that we think is kind of his best value to Georgia, where you just, sometimes he carries the ball, sometimes he catches it, maybe like the Tennessee game in 2023, maybe he throws it. I think there could be room for a lot of that here this year for him on that. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for your comments, and thanks to all of you who share your stories, whether it be, we heard from our buddy Caleb the other day, new baby in his life, he and his wife had a baby, or like Robert, who told us a very different story today. the fact that you share that stuff with us, that you make us a part of your life, we do appreciate the privilege of doing that. And we want to be here for you, good times, bad times, and everything else in between. That's just something we take as an incredible blessing to be able to do that. And I know for all of you who do comment with us here live, or those of you who watch and don't comment, I know that you appreciate that sense of community too. So really, really very thankful for that, and thankful that y'all can be here for each other during times like this, because many of you see more comments than I do, because we're obviously, sometimes doing the show, things like that. But hope you have a great day. Check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on that, including getting your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. So find them online today, rsandrews.com, and we'll see you back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.